Welcome to Eternal Dread, where fear never sleeps. Tell us where you're watching from, and what time it is, because terror has no limits. If you're brave enough, share and comment, but beware, something might be watching you too. Now, turn off the lights, and let the dread begin. I backpack around the country. Sometimes I catch a ride with the occasional semi-driver, but mostly I walk. Everything I need is strapped to my back, and I live simply. Most of the time, it's a good life. That's not to say there aren't downsides. I've been mugged a couple of times, spent nights shivering myself to sleep, and been chased off by crotchety old farmers, sometimes at gunpoint. Lately, I've been drifting through Nebraska and Iowa, where the cornfields stretch on forever, rustling in the breeze. I take meals where I can, and I'm not above scavenging from the trash. I was digging through one such dumpster when I heard the distant crackle of thunder. The storm had been building all afternoon, the sky bruising at the edges, thick clouds swallowing the last hints of sunlight. When the first droplets hit, cold and sharp, I knew I'd be walking through a downpour soon if I didn't find shelter. I took a back road. No cars passed. Just telephone lines, cattle, and fences. That's when I saw it, far across an empty stretch of land, past the buck and pole fences and the swaying thistles. A house, dark and silent, its windows boarded over like lidded eyes. Beyond it, set further back from the road, stood a barn. Peeling red paint, roof sagging at one corner, its wide doors slightly ajar. Something about it made me stop. Maybe the way the last of the light caught on the slanted roof. Maybe the way the shadows pooled too thickly around the entrance. I hesitated. The storm was moving in fast. Wind picked up, whipping through the fields, hissing through the stalks of dead grass. I could keep walking, hope to find shelter somewhere else, but I didn't want to stay in the house. I knew that much. The barn seemed like the safer bet. Lightning split the sky. The rain came harder, soaking through my jacket. The fence was easy to slip through, the mud sucking at my boots as I crossed the field. The house loomed as I passed it, its presence heavy, watching. The barn doors creaked as I pushed them open. The smell hit me first, damp hay, old wood, something else underneath. Something sour. Inside, it was darker than I expected. The rain on the metal roof echoed, hollow and rhythmic, a sound I normally found comforting. But here it felt different, deeper, like it was coming from beneath the floor. I hesitated, scanning the space. Empty stalls. A gutted tractor half buried in the shadows. Loose hay scattered across the dirt. No signs of life. I climbed into the loft, keeping my back to the wall as I unrolled my sleeping bag. The storm raged outside, wind howling through the cracks in the barn walls. I fell into a tangled sleep. A sound jolted me awake. Something rattling in the distance, back near the house. I crept out of my sleeping bag and climbed down the groaning ladder. I flicked the light on and stepped outside. The hail still peppered me as I crossed the stretch toward the house. Behind it, a set of storm cellars sat against the ground. One of the doors thrashed up and down, caught in the wind. The basement beyond churned my stomach. A festering stench of decay wafted up. I flipped the loose door fully open. Thick boards stuck out from the second door, jagged nails like teeth where they had once held it shut. A tingle of doubt ran through me. Did the doors open from the inside? Did the wind rip them loose? I liked this place less and less. Being this close to the house made my skin crawl, though I couldn't put my finger on why. Then I heard it, a rattle at the barn doors behind me, where all my belongings were. I turned. One of the red barn doors quivered like a lip, hanging slightly farther open than I had left it. Another trick of the wind, I told myself. But this place, it felt like stepping into the wrong part of a bad neighborhood. The kind with pit bulls chained up in front yards, where furniture sat on the lawn. The kind where a wrong turn could get you mugged. The feeling sank into my gut like teeth. And yet, there wasn't another soul for miles. And I didn't have any other choice. I walked back toward the barn, flashlight in hand. Then I saw them. Footprints. Bare feet in the mud, long toenails trailing deep into the earth. The prints led toward the barn. I traced them back with my light. They came from the storm cellar. I needed to grab my things and leave. I pulled the barn door back and shone my light inside. The hinges groaned. The beam of my flashlight cut through the gloom. A woman stood with her back to me. Hail clung to the greasy strands of her gray hair. Her clothes hung loose and ragged, sleeves torn, fabric stiff with old stains. "That you?" Her voice cracked, rasping through a throat that sounded raw. Slowly she turned. Her movements were wrong, too stiff, like she wasn't used to them. Her face was a mask of sunken gray lines. Patches of hair were missing, exposing smooth, pale scalp. The sockets where her eyes had been were hollow and wet. Her thin lips, shriveled and gray like dried sardines, barely pulled back enough to reveal teeth like worn tombstones. She sucked at the air. A wet, rattling whistle. I stood frozen. My heart thundered. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. She took a staggered step forward. Her dress, torn to shreds, slipped from her shoulders. A sagging breast peeked through, hollow where the nipple should have been. The flesh was gnawed, as if something had chewed on her. Large teeth marks sank deep into the skin. I backed away slow, pulse hammering in my throat. She walked with a hitch, her torso lifting too much with each step, one hand clutching her chest like she was holding herself together. My backpedaling led me to the barn doors. And then I felt it. Meaty fingers hooked into my shoulder, cold as marble, stiff but strong. The grip was steady, not yanking, not shoving, just holding me in place, something testing my weight. My breath caught. "If it ain't Ben," she murmured, lips barely forming the words, voice thick with something rotten, something wet. "Then we got a trespasser." The stench rolled over the back of my neck like heat off a carcass left too long in the sun. It clung to my skin, bloated, heavy with something rotten. My stomach twisted. Bile crept up my throat. I didn't dare turn my head. She took another step forward, unsteady, shivering like something barely holding together. But I knew what was pressing into my lower back now. 3 dull points, nudging at my spine. A pitchfork, not yet breaking skin, but promising the possibility. "It's me," I blurted, throat tight. "It's Ben." She stopped, listened. The rattling hail filled the space between us, drumming hollow against the barn roof. "Don't sound like Ben." Her jaw hung slack, words thick, like she was rolling them around before spitting them out. The fingers on my shoulder tightened. The pitchfork pressed in a fraction more. I swallowed. "It's me. I'm just under the weather." The lie tumbled out dry weak. She cocked her head, sniffing the air like she could smell the truth. Those empty sockets, slick and glistening, twitched slightly as if searching for me. Her face was unreadable, but I felt the shift in her posture, the hesitation, the way she leaned in just slightly, considering. The silence stretched too long. My pulse throbbing. The grip on my shoulder didn't loosen. Finally, she exhaled, slow and deliberate. "Let's get inside, then." Her voice scraped against the air. Her tongue flicked out, pale pocked with holes, slick as a worm, tasting the space between us. The hand peeled away from my shoulder, slow and deliberate. The prongs of the pitchfork scraped against the dirt floor, dragging just enough to make my skin crawl. The weight of it lingered, a quiet, unspoken threat. I turned, and he was there, a looming figure in a rotting wool coat, the fabric sagging with filth. His frame still carried the ghost of old strength, though his flesh had turned pale, slack, lifeless. His eyes were gone, dark, yawning sockets. Loose skin hung from his neck in ragged strips, peeling like the rind of an overripe orange. His breath wheezed through the moist, ruined tunnel of his trachea. In the dim glow of my flashlight, I caught glimpses of raw, pulpy layers beneath the gaps in his flesh. His hair, like hers, was patchy and thin, matted with filth. A dampness clung to him, something that brought to mind a corpse hauled from the sea. Something that had no business moving anymore. They led me toward the house. When she stumbled past me to take the lead, I caught a glimpse of gleaming bone through the raw nest of her scalp. The air thickened with the smell of old death. My fists clenched. My knuckles burned white. Fear had taken root in my stomach, deep, and it was starting to bloom. There was no one for miles. No one to hear me scream. I had no choice. So I followed them into the storm cellar, my feet dragging. My grip tightened around the flashlight. The walls were damp with black mold, sagging in places, water streaking down in thin trails. The lumbering figure thumped down the steps behind me, still gripping the pitchfork. His gaping mouth worked at the air. She hobbled forward. The room was lined with broken-down shelves, rusted cans scattered across the floor. A folding table sat in the middle, for chairs slid into place around it. Thunder rumbled outside. The man turned and pulled the storm shutters closed, plunging the room into suffocating darkness. My flashlight was still gripped in my palm. It cast stretching shadows across the damp walls. I imagined them down here before I arrived. Alone, sitting in the dark. The thought sent a shudder through me. Were they alive? Were they walking corpses? They smelled dead, but they acted alive. "Sit," she murmured. "Please." I hesitated, then slowly lowered myself into one of the chairs. The air was frigid, the kind of cold that settled deep in the bones. Everything in me screamed that I shouldn't be here. The large male stood in the corner, motionless but breathing. She shuffled into the back room, her steps wet against the concrete. Her shoulders arched forward, not from pain but something deeper, something mechanical, like a body struggling to remember how to move. As she disappeared into the shadows, I turned toward another room across from me. The door was shut. Moving carefully, I rose from my chair, cautious not to make a sound over the shifting groan of the house and the storm beating its fists against the world outside. I crept toward the door, fingers wrapping around the handle. It turned easily, the door pushing open with a reluctant creak. Inside, 2 large dog cages sat against the far wall, their heavy metal bars rusted, but still looked strong enough. Each one was locked with a heavy padlock. In the first, a mummified corpse lay crumpled in on itself, the dried remains of a young man. His clothes clung to his bones, skin pulled tight like old leather. Cobwebs stretched between his fingers, webs caught in the open gape of his jaw. Ben. Their son? I didn't know for sure, but whoever he was actually dead. Unlike them. I sucked in a sharp breath, stomach tightening as I clamped a hand over my mouth. The sound of her footsteps stopped. I held still. The silence stretched, pressing into my ears. Then a shift. A tilt of the head. The man's ear turned slightly, angling toward me like a dog picking up a distant sound. My heart slammed against my ribs. There was a second kennel. Empty. Why? For me? I waited, breath caught in my throat, forcing myself not to move. His head cocked slightly, listening, but then he returned to his stillness. The vacant slits in his head made me think. I remember hearing about how the eyes are the first thing bugs consume when you die. They're the softest. Was that what happened to them? Her feet resumed their slow, wet shuffle in the back room. Moving carefully, I tiptoed back to the chair, lowering myself into it, hands curled into fists beneath the table. She reemerged a moment later, glancing in my direction. She carried a tray and set it down in front of me. Rusted cans of beans, corn, radishes, and other fruits and vegetables sat in a row. The metal was dented, lids peeled open, their edges rimmed with dried blood. Deep grooves from human teeth marked the sides of each can. Inside, a black soup sloshed thickly, rancid and rotting. Come, Harold. Sit. It's dinner time. He moved toward the table, dragging the pitchfork beside him. The prongs carved shallow tracks through the damp sludge on the floor. With a deep groan, he dropped into the chair next to me. They ate slowly, deliberately. Fingers dipped into the cans, scooping up the tar-like slop, shoving it between their lips. Chewing, sucking, swallowing. Wet sounds. Their hollow eyes never left me. A thick dribble of black ichor leaked from the ragged hole in his trachea, soaking into the filth on his overalls. He didn't react. The chewing grew louder. Lips smacking. Cracked teeth grinding. The sick, organic sounds filled the room, drowning out the storm outside. He was too close. His shoulder brushed mine as he hunched over his meal. She sat to my right, her rotted fingers stirring the sludge in her can. Why gotta eat? Keep your strength up. She nudged a can toward me. Pickled yams. The smell hit me instantly, sweetness turned sour. Something squirmed in the black slop. I hesitated, swallowing against the bile rising in my throat. My fingers curled around the rusted can. I took a slow breath and pretended to slurp at it. The smell alone was enough to turn my stomach. But worse was the sight of them, their pale hands working the sludge, their mouths smacking greedily around the rotten pulp of canned fruit and vegetables. The rancid odor of botulism. She leaned in close. I know you ain't Ben. I could feel my eyes widen with terror. As she spoke, black droplets splattered onto my sleeve as she spoke. My heart thumped hard against my ribs. Her lips furled into a smile. I know you saw Ben. In there. She motioned toward the other room. Ben tried to leave. Tried to go to that university. But we had work to do here. So much to do on the farm. Something writhed beneath her scalp, just like in the cans. A yellowed maggot fell from her forehead, wriggling on the table. A bright, searing heat burned in my lungs. I needed to leave. To run. Now. We couldn't let Ben go. We needed him here. With us. She smiled, her mouth a black, oozing void. I watched the maggot writhe in a slow circle. Ben wasn't a survivor. Wasn't built tough. He stopped work in the fields, even after we whipped him. Broke his ankle. Let it heal all wrong so he could wander the property without hobbles. Nothing taught the boy discipline. So we locked him up. Harold tossed an empty can over his shoulder, belching. A sickly, rotting sweetness filled my nostrils. She chewed at a gristly piece of something. Black ichor dribbled down her chin. He stopped moving in there. Couldn't take it. Weak boy. Even Harold and me outlasted him. She reached for my hand, fingers thin and stringy like piano wires. The flesh was damp, her grip cold and clammy like a wet fish. Her cracked nails scraped against my skin. Harold and me, we tried making more babies. They just kept coming out all wrong. Buried and deep in the fields. I sat frozen, my mind clawing for sense, for some kind of reality to latch onto. None of this was right. None of this should have been possible. But her touch, deliberate and real, left no room for doubt. Then you come along, wandering onto our farm. A strong young man. Her grip tightened, fingers locking around my wrist. You could be the son we deserved. Just need to make a few things clear first. A blur of movement. Harold shot up from his seat. Before I could react, the pitchfork slammed down hard on my left hand. The middle barb punched clean through. A gunshot of pain exploded through my body. Oh fuck! Oh fuck! I screamed, falling to my knees. I yanked my right hand free from her grip, her nails tearing at my skin. God damn it! I roared, grasping wildly at the pitchfork's handle. It had been buried deep. The 3 prongs jutted all the way through the underside of the table, my blood trickling from the tips. Grab the leg irons, Harold. I scrambled to my knees, but she only watched, head tilted, listening, that same sick grin stretching her face. Harold's heavy footsteps thudded across the floor, steady, patient, knowing there was nowhere for me to go. If they got those shackles on me, I'd end up like Ben. I'd end up in that cage. My flashlight lay on the ground, its weak beam the only thing keeping the room from total darkness. The same darkness they moved through like blind, naked moles. I lunged for the pitchfork handle, wrenching at it with my free hand, but it wouldn't budge. He'd driven it too deep. I climbed onto the table, bracing my legs against its edge, and pulled, every muscle straining, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Stop it, or I'll put you in that dog cage right now, she hissed, sensing what I was doing, her ruined fingers twitching against the table. I pulled harder, veins bulging in my arms, jaw locked tight, my whole body on fire, the wound in my hand screaming as I put every ounce of strength into the handle. The door creaked before me. Harold was coming. I heard the clank of manacles swinging in his hands, his body a shadow moving without urgency, knowing he didn't have to rush. I yanked, pulled. My teeth began to ache. The pitchfork gave way all at once. I staggered back, the table pitching forward beneath my weight, slamming down onto her arm with a grotesque pop, nearly tearing it from the socket. She made no sound, no scream of pain, only the raspy noise of her breathing as she lifted her head and grinned wider, her lips curling back, black ichor glistening along her gums. I hit the floor hard, my knees sinking into the slick, stinking filth, my boots sliding as I struggled to stand. I had seconds, maybe less. If I didn't move now, I wouldn't get another chance. I bolted toward the door, slipping, catching myself, my pulse hammering in my throat. I heard Harold behind me, moving faster now, charging like a bull, the walls shuddering with his weight. I lunged past my flashlight and wrenched open the storm cellar, throwing my body into it just as his hand shot through the gap. There was no sound, just the awful, meaty crunch as his hand was crushed between the jagged nails on the board that once held the heavy doors shut. I watched, frozen, as his fingers flexed once, twice, the raw skin peeling apart, flesh splitting open, dragging slowly backward through the rusted nails and back into the storm cellar, tearing deep, splitting apart the hand like a ship grinding over a reef. The ruined digits disappeared into the cellar with a thump. I stood there, breathless, chest heaving, rain pounding against the earth outside. God, what were they? Were they even people anymore? Plus, I rushed toward the barn, feet pounding through the mud, breath burning in my throat. The storm cellars tore open behind me when I was halfway across. I didn't look back, but I heard the splintering wood, the slap of bare feet in the rain. The earth was a mess of deep puddles now, the hail softening into a relentless downpour, soaking through my clothes as I pushed forward. The barn loomed ahead, red and peeling, the place where all of this began. I turned. Through the dark and the rain, I saw them. His massive frame. Her hunched, twisted silhouette. They were coming, slow but sure, drawn to the sound of me even over the storm. I had to get my pack. Everything I owned, every piece of my life, was in there. Without it, I was as good as dead. Even if it meant risking more, losing more, I had to retrieve it. I reached the barn and yanked the doors shut behind me, but the latch was useless, broken on the floor. No way to keep them out. I climbed into the loft, shoving my gear into my pack as fast as my shaking hands allowed. They were close now. I buried myself in a pile of soiled hay, curled tight, pulling more over me, barely breathing. "Shoulda hobbled you the second I saw ya," she muttered from below. The tension coiled tight, a wire stretched to its breaking point. You wouldn't be able to follow me up here, too big, too heavy, but she could. I heard her hands scrabbling against the rungs of the ladder, her feet clumsy as she climbed. The wood groaned under her weight. A wet, uneven shuffle. She was on all fours now, crawling across the loft, sifting through the hay. I held my breath. She was inches away, close enough that I could make out the thin, cracked line of her lips, the way they barely covered the dark gums beneath. Close enough that the stink of her clung to the air, thick with the sweetness of decay. I heard her tongue move inside her mouth, restless, shifting, like something separate from her. Her ruined hand, swollen and trembling, dropped into the straw beside my leg. A strand of spit dangled from her lips. I felt it land on my shirt. I forced my eyes shut, clenched my teeth, willed my body to stay still even as my muscles burned with the need to move. My leg cramped hard, but I swallowed the pain, the panic. She sniffed once. Her fingers curled into the straw. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The smell of her filled my mouth, my lungs, the back of my throat. Then she shifted, stilled, decided, and she retreated, crawling back down the ladder without a word. I stayed frozen, barely daring to breathe, listening as they rifled through the stalls below, kicking through piles of garbage and rotted hay. I waited, long after she left, long after I heard his heavy boots drag away. 30 minutes, an hour, maybe more. Only when the rain stopped and the first thin light pushed through the slats of the barn did I move. I slipped down, careful, silent, my wounded hand throbbing deep in my bones. I noticed no birds chirped, no crickets called, no frogs croaked. The land was eerie in its silence, dead in its stillness, cursed, poisoned. For a moment, I almost convinced myself none of it had happened, that these things were just delusions, paranoia brought on by exhaustion and old habits clawing at the edges of my mind. But as I crept out of the barn, I saw the soil, trampled by many footprints. Some were mine, most were not. If you're a fellow drifter, if you ever pass an abandoned red barn in the middle of nowhere, keep on walking. You ever have one of those moments where you look back and think, that was the point where I should have turned around? I think about that a lot now. Omar, Ryan, and I were supposed to have a once-in-a-lifetime trip. One final adventure before Omar got married and settled down. No wild bachelor parties, no drunken chaos in some city nightclub. Omar wanted something different, a real experience. So we wrote down a bunch of dream destinations, tossed them into a hat, and let fate decide. Banff, Canada. None of us had ever been to Canada before, let alone the rugged wilderness of the Rockies. It was the perfect mix of adventure and relaxation. Hiking, breathtaking views, fresh air, and most importantly, no distractions. Just us and nature. I can't even remember now if it was Omar or Ryan who pulled that piece of paper out of the hat, but I do remember the feeling that settled in my gut as soon as we arrived. The initial excitement was there, of course, but something else polluted that joyous feeling, like an oil slick on a beautiful shoreline, like we weren't supposed to be there. At first, I chalked it up to the eerie quiet of the place. Banff is stunning, no doubt. Snow-capped mountains, crystal-clear lakes, forests stretching as far as the eye can see. But there was something about it. Something off. I know how that sounds. Like I'm trying to spook you before I even get to the good part. But I need you to understand, I'm not writing this for entertainment. I'm writing this because I need someone else to know what happened to us. Because something out there in the mountains was watching us. And I don't think we were ever meant to leave. If you had told me back then that this trip would be the scariest experience of my life, I would have laughed. The truth is, for the first few days, Banff felt like something out of a dream. Our flight landed in Calgary in the late afternoon, the sky a soft, endless blue stretching over miles of open prairie. It took us no time at all to grab the rental car, a rugged SUV that Omar insisted on for the authentic mountain experience, and hit the road. The drive started off flat and golden, the kind of landscape that makes you feel like you're on the edge of something much bigger. Every now and then, we'd pass clusters of horses grazing in the fields, their coats shimmering in the last light of the day. At one point, we slowed down to take in an odd sight, a lone coyote lounging near a herd of horses as if it belonged there. It wasn't hunting. It wasn't lurking. It was just there, resting in the grass as the horses grazed around it, completely unbothered. Never seen that before, Ryan muttered, eyes fixed on the scene. Maybe he thinks he's a horse, Omar joked. We kept driving, and soon the mountains began to rise in the distance, a jagged wall of stone that seemed to swallow the sky. The closer we got, the more everything changed. The air, the colors, even the way the light hit the landscape. The golden fields gave way to dense forests, rivers twisting through valleys, the world becoming wilder with every mile. Then, just as we rounded a bend, we saw them. A small herd of elk, standing right in the middle of the road. Ryan braked hard, and we all jolted forward in our seats. But the elk, they didn't even flinch. Guess we're not in a rush anymore, I said, watching as one of the bulls turned its massive head toward us. We waited. 5 minutes. 10. They didn't move. Just stood there, their breath visible in the cool air, their ears flicking at unseen sounds in the trees. And it wasn't just their size that struck me. It was the stillness of them, the way they belonged to this place in a way we never could. This is insane, Omar whispered. It feels alive here, Ryan added. Like everything's watching us. I nodded, remembering a different trip we'd taken a few years back, Scotland, where we'd driven for hours through misty, rolling hills, expecting to see something majestic and only ever finding sheep. Just sheep. Miles and miles of them. This is way better than Scotland, I said, snapping a photo. Ryan laughed. Anything's better than Scotland. Eventually, the elk moved on, vanishing into the trees as silently as they'd appeared. We started driving again, deeper into the mountains, watching as the last light of the sun bled into the horizon. The road stretched ahead of us, winding deeper into the mountains. The sky had darkened into that perfect shade of deep blue, just before night fully settles in, and the forest around us felt endless. It had been maybe 20 minutes since the elk had finally moved on, and we were still buzzing from the encounter. Imagine living here, Omar said, leaning forward in his seat. Like waking up every morning, and this is just normal. Ryan scoffed. I'd get nothing done. I'd just be staring out my window all day. I grinned, about to add something, when Ryan suddenly hit the brakes. Another roadblock. Only this one wasn't caused by animals. A Parks Canada ranger stood in the middle of the road, illuminated by the red flashers of his truck. Several other vehicles were pulled off to the side, some with their hazard lights blinking. Whatever was happening, we couldn't see it. The ranger's truck and the parked cars ahead were blocking our view. Ryan slowed to a stop, frowning. What the hell is this? The ranger, a tall guy with a thick jacket and a Parks Canada cap, raised a gloved hand and waved us down. His expression was calm, but there was something in his posture, firm, deliberate. Ryan rolled down the window as the ranger stepped up. Hey folks, the ranger said, his voice steady. Just a quick delay. Stay in your vehicle for now. What's going on? Omar asked. The ranger hesitated, glancing briefly toward whatever was ahead. Just some wildlife activity. He gave us a polite but unreadable nod and then, without another word, turned and climbed back into his truck. Ryan sighed, shifting in his seat. All right, that was vague as hell. We sat there, watching, waiting. A few of the other cars had people inside, recording with their phones. Some even had cameras with long lenses poking out their windows. Okay, now I want to know what's going on, I muttered. Ryan reached for the door handle. I'll just ask. Before he could even crack the door open, the ranger's truck lights flashed, and from inside, he gave a quick but unmistakable stay in your car gesture. Ryan exhaled, letting go of the handle. Guess that answers that. We looked at each other, then back at the other parked cars. The people filming weren't looking at the ranger, or even at the roadblock itself. Their cameras were pointed toward the tree line. Something was in the woods, and whatever it was worth recording. The tension in the car thickened as we tried to see what everyone else was recording. The ranger sat still in his truck, watching the trees, his hand resting near his radio. Then the forest shifted. A low rustling, the sound of something big moving through the brush. And then he appeared. A gigantic grizzly bear lumbered out of the trees, his sheer size making every single one of us go silent. He was a beast, easily over 600 pounds, with thick fur that rippled over powerful muscle as he moved. His face was scarred, his shoulders broad, and when he turned his head slightly toward us, I felt my breath catch in my throat. No wonder the ranger wanted us to stay inside. The bear barely acknowledged the line of vehicles as he plodded forward, staying a safe distance away. Then, with an almost lazy motion, he rose onto his hind legs. Now, I've seen bears in zoos before, but this was different. Standing like that, he was taller than the SUV, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Even the people filming had gone dead silent. It was like being in the presence of something ancient, something that owned this land in a way we never could. And I knew who he was. "Holy shit," I whispered. "That's the boss." Ryan and Omar glanced at me. "The what?" Ryan asked, his voice barely above a breath. "The boss. He's famous. I saw him in a bunch of Banff videos online. He's the biggest grizzly in the park. They think he's like 20 years old." Omar stared at the bear, who was still sniffing the air, his massive claws hanging in front of his chest. "He's huge." "Yeah," I nodded. "And get this, he survived getting hit by a train. Twice." "No way," Ryan muttered. "Swear to God," I said. "And he's still kicking ass. He's fathered a bunch of cubs, he steals kills from wolves, and he even eats other bears." "Jesus," Omar whispered. "What a legend." The boss slowly dropped back down onto all fours with a heavy thud and continued his way across the road, his hulking frame moving with surprising ease. The ranger still hadn't moved, just watching, waiting. No one spoke. No one dared to move. And then, just as effortlessly as he had arrived, the boss disappeared into the trees on the other side of the road. For a long moment, we all just sat there, processing what we had just seen. Then the ranger's radio crackled, breaking the silence. A moment later, he opened his door, stepped out, and waved us forward. Ryan let out a breath. "Well," he said, gripping the wheel, "Banff's already better than Scotland." None of us disagreed. As we drove past, the three of us were still buzzing from what we had just seen. I mean, how many people could say they saw the boss up close like that? The whole thing felt unreal. But as the road cleared and Ryan eased the SUV forward, a new thought crept into my mind. What was he doing in the road for that long? I muttered. Omar shrugged. "Just vibing." Ryan nodded. "When you're that big, I guess you can do whatever the hell you want." We chuckled, but something about it felt off. A bear like that, a top predator, didn't just hang around like that unless there was a reason. And then we saw it. At the edge of the tree line, just a few feet off the road, were the remains of a much smaller black bear. Half-eaten. The laughter in the car died instantly. No one said a word. We just stared as we slowly rolled past, the shape of the carcass unmistakable even in the fading light. Ribs exposed, fur matted with blood, torn flesh. Ryan reached over and silently pressed the lock button on the doors. Click. Omar did the same on his side. Click. I followed suit. Click. No one acknowledged it. We just kept driving, eyes forward, pretending we had seen nothing. Only once we had put a solid few miles between us, and that scene did Omar finally clear his throat and say, "So, anyone else feel like that was some mafia shit?" I exhaled. "Yup." Ryan nodded. "I don't think I ever want to meet a bear that eats other bears." By the time we finally rolled into Banff, the sky had darkened into a deep navy blue, the last hints of sunlight fading behind the jagged peaks. The town itself was like something out of a postcard, cozy wooden buildings, warm lights glowing from shop windows, and the towering mountains standing like silent guardians in the distance. After checking into our hotel, a rustic little lodge with wood-paneled walls and thick wool blankets, we wasted no time heading out to explore. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and distant campfires. Everything about Banff felt alive, like the land itself had a pulse. We wandered down Banff Avenue, popping in and out of souvenir shops, grabbing small gifts for family and friends back home. Ryan bought his girlfriend a cute little carved bear figurine. Omar picked up a ridiculously overpriced hoodie that he swore was worth every penny. And I grabbed a few postcards, already planning to write something obnoxiously sentimental on them. The locals were just as warm as the town itself. Bartenders, shopkeepers, even random people on the street were happy to chat, throwing out recommendations left and right. If you want a real challenge, a young guy at an outdoor gear shop told us, try scrambling up Mount Rundle. Go canoeing on Vermilion Lakes at sunrise, suggested a woman at a cafe. That's when the water is perfect. But it was an older French-Canadian man, sitting outside a small pub with a pint of beer in one hand and a cigarette in the other, who really caught our attention. "You boys look like the adventurous type," he said, his accent thick but smooth. "If you want to camp somewhere really special, forget the tourist spots. Go to Elephas Peak." Omar, already buzzing with excitement about this trip, leaned in. "Never heard of it. What's up there?" The man smiled, eyes crinkling at the corners. "Nothing but stars and silence. No crowds. Just you and the mountains." Ryan looked skeptical. "Isn't it kind of off the beaten path?" The man waved a hand dismissively. "Not too bad. A bit of a hike, but worth it. And if you need a tent, I have an extra." We exchanged glances. This was exactly the kind of experience we were looking for. Something real. Something raw. Omar grinned. I'm in. I hesitated for half a second, but the excitement was contagious. All right, let's do it. Ryan exhaled. Fine. But if we die, I'm haunting you both. The old man chuckled. Bon courage, mes Amos. We clinked our beers together, already imagining the adventure ahead. At that moment, Banff still felt magical. We had no idea what was waiting for us in the mountains. The next morning, we wasted no time getting ready for our camping trip. After a solid breakfast at a local diner, we hit the outdoor supply shops, picking up food, extra layers, and a canister of bear spray for good measure. The old French guy who had suggested Eliphas Peak met us outside our hotel, true to his word, and handed over his spare tent with a knowing smile. Be careful up there, he said as we loaded our gear into the SUV. We will, Omar promised, practically bouncing with excitement. By noon, we had everything prepped for the following day. With a few hours to kill, we decided to split up and explore Banff on our own. Omar wanted to check out the hot springs, Ryan went off in search of a local brewery, and I, ever the wildlife nerd, made my way to the Banff Park Museum. The place was small but packed with history, its walls lined with glass cases of taxidermy animals. Grizzlies, bison, wolverines, an entire frozen snapshot of the wild, preserved up close. I wandered the aisles, taking my time, stopping in front of a lynx display. The thing was beautiful, its fur thick, its massive paws built for silent movement in deep snow. Rare to see one in the wild, came a voice beside me. I turned to see a Parks Canada ranger standing nearby. He was older, maybe mid-50s, with long, graying black hair tied back and a uniform that looked well worn. Yeah, I said, nodding. I read they avoid people. He gave a small smile. Smart animals. They know what places to stay away from. I wasn't sure why, but something about the way he said it made me pause. We started chatting, and I quickly realized he was native, likely from one of the First Nations in the area. He had a quiet, steady way of speaking, like someone who had spent a lifetime observing the land rather than talking about it. We talked about lynx, their hunting patterns, their near invisibility in the snow. It was a good conversation, until I mentioned Eliphas Peak. The moment the words left my mouth, his expression shifted. Not dramatic, just off. His polite interest faded, his posture stiffened slightly, and for the first time since we started talking, he broke eye contact. Where did you say you were going? He asked. Eliphas Peak, I repeated, suddenly feeling unsure. We're camping there tomorrow. He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the lynx display, but he wasn't looking at it. His jaw tightened, and when he finally spoke again, his voice was lower, quieter. Bad idea. That was it. No explanation. Just those two words. I blinked. Why? His eyes flicked to mine, and for the first time, there was something heavy in them. A weight I couldn't place. Dangerous wildlife, he said simply. That should have been a normal response. Banff was full of predators, bears, cougars, wolves. But something about the way he said it sent a chill up my spine. I swallowed. What kind of wildlife? He didn't answer right away. Then, just as I was about to ask again, he gave a tight nod and said, Have a safe trip. And just like that, the conversation was over. I watched as he turned and walked toward the museum entrance, disappearing through a side door. Something about the whole exchange left me uneasy. I told myself he was just being cautious. Maybe he'd had to deal with one too many clueless tourists who thought they could waltz into the backcountry without knowing the risks. But as I stood there, staring at the lynx's frozen, glassy gaze, I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something. Something he didn't want to say out loud. I didn't mention the conversation with the ranger to Ryan or Omar. Maybe I should have. But at the time, I chalked it up to nothing more than an old-timer being overly cautious. After all, if Eliphas Peak was really dangerous, surely more people would have warned us, right? So I shook it off. And the next morning, we packed up our gear, stuffed the borrowed tent into the SUV, and headed out. The first stretch of the trip was smooth, the paved roads winding through towering evergreens, the air crisp and fresh. The whole morning had a golden glow to it, the sunlight bouncing off the peaks, making everything look too perfect. We were about 20 minutes outside Banff when we saw it. At first, it was just a blur of movement at the side of the road. Something dark. Fast. Then as we got closer, we realized what we were looking at. A black wolf. It was massive, larger than I thought wolves could get, its jet black fur sleek and rippling with muscle. But what really made us go silent was what was trapped in its jaws. a full-grown bighorn ram. The wolf had it by the throat, the ram's body limp, eyes wide with the glassy stillness of death. Ryan slowed the SUV to a crawl as we passed, all three of us watching in stunned silence. The wolf barely acknowledged us, its yellow eyes flicking up for half a second before it turned and disappeared into the trees, dragging the ram's body with it like it weighed nothing. Omar let out a long breath. Jesus, that thing was huge. Ryan exhaled sharply, gripping the wheel. Did you see how easily it carried that thing? Rams weigh like, 200 pounds? At least, I muttered. For a moment, none of us spoke. The image of that wolf, the way it looked at us like it knew something, stuck in my head. Then Omar clapped his hands together. All right, let's move on before it decides we look tasty. Ryan shook his head, chuckling. Yeah, back to the wilderness we go. And just like that, we put the black wolf behind us. The rest of the drive was uneventful. The roads gradually got rougher, shifting from pavement to gravel, then to dirt, as we climbed higher into the mountains. The tree line grew thinner, and by the time we reached the base of Eliphas Peak, the world felt different. Quieter. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The other kind. I told myself it was just the isolation. But deep down, I knew it was something else. By the time we reached the clearing near the base of Eliphas Peak, the sun was starting to dip behind the mountains. The campsite was nothing special, just a relatively flat patch of land tucked between clusters of tall pines, with a small fire pit made of scattered stones from past campers. No official signs, no marked trails, just raw wilderness. We set up without issue, pitching the old French guy's tent and rolling out our sleeping bags. Omar, ever the self-proclaimed survival expert, took charge of gathering firewood while Ryan and I unpacked our food. By the time the fire was crackling, we were all in good spirits, sitting around with beers in hand and talking about everything and nothing. It felt good. The crisp mountain air, the occasional breeze rustling through the trees. It was exactly the kind of trip Omar had envisioned. No loud bars, no overpriced clubs. Just us halfway across the world, soaking in nature. Then, as we sat in comfortable silence, staring into the flames, we heard something. At first, I couldn't even process what I was hearing. It started like an elk bugle, that high-pitched, eerie whistling sound that echoed across the valley. But then halfway through it shifted. The tone cracked and warped, turning into something that sounded more like a coyote's howl. And then, a man's scream. Not a distant, vague cry. Not the kind of noise you could write off as imagination. It was sharp, human, and filled with pain. The three of us snapped our heads up at the same time. No one moved. No one spoke. We just listened as the sound stretched out, bouncing off the surrounding cliffs. It was impossible to tell where it was coming from. Could have been miles away. Could have been closer. Then, just as suddenly as it started, silence. We sat frozen, waiting, half expecting to hear it again. Nothing. Omar was the first to break. The hell was that? Ryan shook his head, his face pale in the firelight. An elk, maybe? I swallowed. Elk don't sound like that. We stared at each other for a long moment. The fire popped. The trees swayed. Eventually, Omar forced a chuckle. Probably just an animal that got spooked or something. It's the wild, man. Weird sounds happen. Ryan exhaled and nodded. Yeah, true. I wanted to agree. I really did. But something about the way the sound changed, from an animal's call to something so unmistakably human, had left a pit in my stomach. We stayed up a little longer, half joking, half jittery, before eventually crawling into the tent. I told myself it was nothing, but as I lay there in the dark, staring at the nylon ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something out there had seen us first. And that sound, it wasn't just an animal. It was a warning. The night descended slowly, the air cooling quickly as the sun sank behind the jagged peaks. The three of us huddled inside the borrowed tent, laughing off the strange noise we'd heard earlier. We convinced ourselves it had been some combination of elk and coyote. Nature was unpredictable. We were just guests in its realm. All right. Omar grinned as he lay down in the middle of the tent. No more talk of weird animal calls, okay? Let's just enjoy the damn trip. Ryan, already half zoned out, let out a sleepy grunt of agreement. I, on the other hand, couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. But it was late, and fatigue had started to take hold. I rolled over in my sleeping bag, trying to push the uneasy thoughts aside. The fire had burned down to embers, and the world outside seemed still. Before I knew it, we were all asleep. The rhythmic sound of the wind rustling the trees and the soft crackle of a distant creek played in the background, lulling us into a false sense of security. But then, snuffling. It started quietly, like a wet, sniffing sound coming from just outside the tent. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. The kind of primal fear that takes over when you know you're not alone. The snuffling continued, like something was pushing its nose against the fabric, sniffing us out. It sounded close, too close. My mind screamed bear. Ryan stirred beside me. What the hell? I didn't answer. I was already reaching for the bear spray. The snuffling grew louder. It sounded like it was circling us, moving around the tent, testing the boundaries of the small space we'd made for ourselves. The deep, rasping breath of something big. Something dangerous. My fingers found the canister of bear spray, the metal cold in my hands. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, my breath shallow and quick. I clicked the safety off, the sound sharp in the quiet night, click. The snuffling stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of our breathing, the quiet hum of wind through the trees. The air felt too thick, too still. My grip tightened around the bear spray. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me, my pulse racing in time with my thoughts. Don't move, I whispered. No one moved. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Then, in the distance, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the valley. A flash of lightning lit up the sky, briefly illuminating the exterior of the tent in a stark white light. For just a moment, I saw the dark silhouette of something moving outside. Great, I thought, my grip tightening on the bear spray. Now a storm's coming too. The wind picked up, but it wasn't enough to drown out the sound of the shifting outside. The rustle of fabric, the soft scraping of something long and thin dragging against the ground. Every movement outside was deliberate, slow, as if whatever was out there was testing the air, figuring out how to approach us. Another flash of lightning split the sky, and in that brief instant I saw it. Not a bear, not a coyote. I froze, my stomach twisting in a way I can't even explain. It was a humanoid shape, tall and thin, far too thin. The silhouette was barely discernible at first, but the lightning illuminated it just enough to make my blood run cold. The figure was in the process of standing up, its body unnaturally elongated, as if it had been crouching low to the ground just moments before. I blinked, thinking it was just a trick of the light, but when the flash of lightning struck again, it revealed more. Long arms, disproportionately long, almost like it had been stretched, a grotesque parody of a human figure. The arms hung too low, swaying with the wind in unnatural ways, each one twitching slightly as if the creature was adjusting its posture. And the head, thin, too thin, with long tendrils of hair swaying slightly in the breeze. It almost looked like they were moving independently, separate from the head itself, curling like something alive. I could feel my heart in my throat. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. It was like I was staring at something that shouldn't exist, a creature pulled from some fevered dream. Ryan's breath hitched beside me. Omar shifted, but I could hear his breath quicken too. None of us said anything. We couldn't. Our mouths were dry, our eyes locked on the figure outside, frozen in place. I couldn't tell how much time passed. My thoughts were scattered, my mind struggling to process what I'd just seen. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't something that belonged in the wilds of Banff. Not something that should have been anywhere near our campsite. We lay there, as still as we could manage, hoping, praying, that whatever that creature was would stay out there in the shadows. But deep down we all knew. It wasn't done with us. The thunder cracked above us, louder than ever, as if the sky itself was splitting apart. But the storm wasn't what made my heart hammer in my chest. It was what came next. The roar. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't anything remotely natural. It was something far worse. A chimeric wail, part animal, part something unrecognizably other. It tore through the night, joining the cacophony of thunder and wind. My body went cold, paralyzed in a state of pure terror. I could feel the vibrations of the sound in my bones, a deep, raw rage that sent shockwaves through the air. And then, almost as if the creature's roar had activated something deep within me, I acted without thinking. Before I even realized what I was doing, I had unzipped the tent flap. I could hear Omar shout something, but his voice was drowned out by the overwhelming roar. I didn't care. I didn't even stop to think, my fingers trembling as I fumbled for the nozzle. I aimed it at the spot just beyond the tent, where the creature had crouched earlier. I squeezed. The spray hissed in the air, and for a moment, I felt like I was moving in slow motion. The thick mist of bear mace shot into the night, spraying directly into the creature's face. There was a horrible sound, a guttural, agonizing wail that pierced through the roar of thunder. The creature recoiled, its long arms flailing as it stumbled backward. It shrieked, its hands clutching at its eyes, as if the very air was burning its flesh. The sound was deafening. The sheer pain in that wail, a wail that should never have come from anything living, sent chills through my spine. My brain was screaming, but my body was moving before I could catch up. I heard Ryan yell, "Go! Go! Go!" and the sound of him scrambling, running toward the car. Omar was already on his feet, pulling me with him as we dashed to the SUV, hearts pounding in our chests. Everything after that felt like a blur. The tent was left behind, the cold, wet air hitting my face as I bolted toward the car. My mind couldn't process what we were seeing. The scene unfolding before us was too much, too impossible to understand. As we neared the vehicle, I dared a glance back, my mind trying desperately to force some sense of reality into the nightmare we were witnessing. The creature was still there, writhing in pain. Its long, gangly form was twisting, thrashing, but it was clear that the mace had caused it unimaginable distress. It barely resembled anything human anymore, its proportions even more distorted in the chaos of its agony. But even through the haze of panic, we saw something that made our stomachs drop further. There were more. In the darkness, just at the edge of our vision, other shapes were moving, barely perceptible but unmistakably there. The long, thin silhouettes of more of those creatures, dozens of them, twitching, swaying, almost like they were emerging from the shadows themselves. But my mind couldn't register it. I couldn't. Ryan yanked open the SUV's door, and we all scrambled in, my heart a racing blur of panic. As I slammed the door shut, I could see the creature from the tent now stumbling away, still clutching its burning face. It turned, stumbling into the darkness, its form disappearing into the trees. The engine roared to life, and Ryan slammed the pedal down. I don't remember much after the crash. The world spun like a chaotic blur of glass and metal, the screams of my friends barely audible over the deafening roar of the creature's screech. It was a sound that seemed to reverberate in my chest, rattling my bones, and I knew we weren't going to make it. The thing had charged out of the woods, straight at us, too fast for any of us to react in time. It came from nowhere, like a phantom from a nightmare, and I could only watch in frozen horror as it covered the distance between us in an instant. It was monstrous. The headlights illuminated it just long enough for us to make out its full form. A rail-thin humanoid creature, its long arms reaching out toward the car, its face twisted in a grotesque snarl. It was impossibly tall, its body unnaturally elongated, with thin tendrils of hair swaying in the wind like the reeds of a swamp. Its eyes, glowing, predatory, locked onto us in the car as it surged toward us, and all I could think was, "We're going to die." Ryan screamed, his hands yanking the steering wheel as he tried to swerve, but the thing wasn't having it. With a roar that shook the car, it slammed into the side of our vehicle, a collision that felt like the earth itself had buckled beneath us. The metal of the car groaned under its weight, and in a single, violent motion, it tossed us off the road. The car spun uncontrollably, tumbling through the air as trees and rocks blurred past the windows. It was as if time had slowed. I remember seeing Ryan's panicked face, his hand gripping the wheel as he tried to correct the car, but it was too late. The world flipped upside down, and I could taste the cold air as we plummeted toward the ground. The last thing I saw before everything went black was that thing, the creature, standing there, watching, waiting, as our car rolled and crashed into a tree with a sickening thud. Then darkness. I woke up in a hospital bed days later. The light was harsh and white above me, making everything feel distant, like I was still floating in some kind of dream. My body was sore, every muscle aching from the crash, and I could barely make sense of where I was. My hands shook as I reached up to touch my face, feeling the cuts and bruises that had formed from the impact. I was alive, but barely. Ryan was sitting next to the bed, his eyes tired but relieved when he saw I was awake. "Josh," he said, his voice hoarse. "You're awake. Good to see you, man." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, like I hadn't drunk anything in hours. I croaked, "What happened? Where's Omar?" Ryan sighed, looking down for a moment before meeting my eyes. "He's fine. Both of us are fine. But you took the worst of it. The crash. It was bad. We barely got out of there in time." I swallowed, piecing together fragments of the events that led up to this point. "The creature. What happened to it?" Ryan hesitated. His gaze faltered, then he finally spoke. "It didn't get us. But it almost did. Almost." I frowned, confused. "What do you mean almost?" "It hit us. It almost killed us." Ryan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face as if he was still processing everything. After the crash, we couldn't get the car started. We could still hear that thing, Josh. It was out there in the woods, screeching. That noise was, I don't know. It wouldn't stop. But then out of nowhere, this guy, remember the native guy from the museum? He said he met you there. He showed up, came out of the woods with his family. I blinked. Wait, what? The guy at the museum? He came for us? Ryan nodded, his voice low. Yeah, he came with a few people. I don't know how they found us so fast, but they did. And they helped us. More importantly, they helped us get rid of it, and the rest of those things. Get rid of it? I asked, my voice shaking. How? Ryan exhaled, eyes narrowing. They fought them. I don't know how they did it, but they had some kind of ritual. The guy spoke in a language I didn't understand. And when the creature screamed again, it just stopped. Backed off. Disappeared into the woods. I felt a shiver run down my spine. They just left. Yeah, just like that. It was like the guy knew exactly how to make it go away. After that, they made sure we were okay and stayed with us until help arrived. I stared at him in disbelief, trying to make sense of it all. Ultimately, I just lay down and chose to just be thankful to be alive. The rest of our trip was a blur. We tried to carry on like everything was fine, but the unease never left us. Every night, we half expected that creature to come back, but nothing ever did. We made it through the rest of our time in Banff, sightseeing, but it felt like we were walking in the shadow of something we couldn't fully comprehend. Then 2 weeks later, we were on our way out of Banff. The drive was quiet, and I tried not to look back. But as we approached the edge of town, I saw him. The Frenchman. He was standing at the edge of town, staring at us as we drove past. His expression was hard to read, but I could see it. He wasn't just looking at us. He was watching, and the frustration on his face was unmistakable. I don't know why, but the sight of him made my stomach turn. I glanced at Ryan and Omar, but neither of them noticed. They were too busy chatting, completely oblivious. I didn't look back after that. I didn't need to. Something told me we'd never fully understand what had happened in those mountains. That creature, the warnings, the Frenchman's strange look, all of it was part of something larger, something we weren't meant to understand. But as we drove out of Banff, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't seen the last of it, that whatever had been watching us, whatever had been waiting, was still out there. And I couldn't help but wonder, what else could be out there in the world? As I got older, my parents told me that I was becoming a young adult and should leave Chuck E. Cheese behind. They weren't wrong. The place wasn't what it used to be, and a majority of the arcade games were being thinned out for machines that felt like they were games of chance. It was sad to see something devolve so much, but I moved on quite easily when I spotted an advertisement that read, "Coming soon, Zags Theater." At first, I thought it was a movie theater chain until I Googled the name and learned how people could pay for a LARPing experience. This was amazing to me because I never participated in such a thing, and I always loved watching videos of people role-playing. I was even a part of a play by Post Forum that has since died out. On its website, Zags was advertised as an event for all ages with quests that matured as the participant got older, so it wasn't like I was attending something for children. Months passed as I awaited the grand opening, in which I passed time by finishing a backlog of games until the doors swung open. I waited for school to end while trying to contain my excitement, and when that bell rang, I burst out of the class and into the streets as I made my way to the establishment. It was located in a walkable outlet mall where a bunch of people were waiting in line outside. A banner with the words "Grand Opening," along with the Zag character, hung above the doors. He resembled a sprite, wore a purple tunic, had a purple pointy hat with hair sticking out, and he donned a big set of shoes. I later learned that Zag was actually a different type of kobold, and not the short dragon kind that a lot of people were used to seeing. After a bit of waiting, it was finally my turn as I approached the front desk. The lobby had several doors. One lead to a big hallway that took you to the waiting room, and one lead to a souvenir store that sold merchandise of the various characters. Unfortunately, I don't own any of the merchandise which would have helped in proving the place's existence, but at the time, I thought I didn't need any of it. I paid and was handed a helmet which when worn would display my statuses in-game. They were simplified to things like strength, speed, constitution, and intelligence. You could raise them upon each level up. Experience points weren't locked behind just slaying monsters, but also for solving puzzles or helping the various NPCs. Wearing the helmet was also the only way to see any of the monsters, as they would otherwise be invisible. The only people not invisible were the actors who dressed up as important characters such as a witch, bard, and a king's steward who returned frequently in the following quests. There were a total of 4 different classes: the knight, thief, wizard, and cleric. It was all typical of the medieval fantasy setting, but I decided on the thief as I was rushed by the receptionist. As I was escorted to the waiting room, I was told a set of rules. The 2 I remembered the most were the following. Cooperative mode was restricted to only friends due to several incidents involving strangers attacking each other over disagreements. Under no circumstances was the helmet to be removed during sessions. It made sense as taking it off would kill all immersion. To accommodate for everyone getting a chance, visits were limited to once a day. Violations of these rules would lead to a week ban. I also learned there were 3 different kinds of tiers. Things would start easy, but they would get harder as you advanced in the levels. This meant that the enemies would start generic, such as goblins, orcs, and skeletons. There was a chance of running into something interesting like centaurs or manticores, but they were rare encounters. I was taken to the waiting room, where I waited nearly an hour before I was finally called. To be fair, it was the grand opening. Each room I entered either had me fighting a monster in turn-based tradition, solving a puzzle, or interacting with an NPC to try to gather clues. I remember my first objective was to find the nest of a magpie that had stolen an emerald ring off the fingers of a maiden. At one point, I got so cocky and my health depleted. However, by spending a bit of money, I was able to revive myself and proceed. Sigh. Microtransactions at their finest. Some rooms could be solved by making use of class abilities. One example is that I could sneak past some of the monsters or pick the lock on a door as the thief to bypass a fight or puzzle. There would be consequences for failing, but it was usually an effect that wasn't severe. After finally locating the emerald ring that was stolen, I made my way to the next room to be rewarded with experience points and gold. I leveled up a couple of times and learned that the gold could be used to upgrade equipment. I decided to save it for things that I felt would be needed and was mostly stingy on the first tier. Upon receiving my reward, everything would carry over into the following sessions, thanks to a card handed to me, and the following door would deposit participants outside the building. The first few months of visiting Zags was uneventful. It was just typical quests that you would find in any role-playing game, but it was all in good fun. Sometimes, a rare event would play out where you could run into Zag the Kobold. I didn't know about this until my first encounter with him. Sometimes you had to catch him, sometimes he would just help out. Either way, he would do one of 4 things. He could restore the player's health, give some extra gold, grant experience points, or on the rare occasion, he would give you a magical item if he felt like you were falling behind. On the following weeks, I spoke with a couple of students about Zag's theater. They kept talking about going back again and again, but as months passed, their opinion on the place changed. I don't want to talk about Zags anymore. Some of the characters and monsters frightened me. I tried to pressure for details, but the 2 siblings walked off and I never saw them again. To be fair, the killer clown or werewolf encounters may have been a little too much, but I also believed, at the time, that they were simply exaggerating things. I returned to the doors of Zag's theater and learned that I had reached 2nd tier as my character. The quests and enemies would be trickier, but again, I was determined to see how far I would get. I also wanted to get to 3rd tier because my peers were envious of those who reached it, and I wanted to be that cool guy that people talked about. This time, I noticed that the lines had dwindled a bit, which confirmed that for some people, the novelty was beginning to wear off. For me, it meant having less of a wait time. I was surprised by how dark some of these new objectives were. One of the quests was to use stealth to murder a child who had been infected with a dangerous incurable disease. Their parents told me that I had to do the deed, as there wasn't any medicine that could help. There was also a room where animal bones laid scattered about. The flowers beneath them were white as they drained all remaining blood from their kills. Stepping into any of them would drain your health, so I had to navigate around the killer plants. I assumed that this encounter was what unsettled the siblings in my school. In the weeks to follow, I had decked myself out in powerful equipment, which was thanks to my unwillingness to spend on the 1st tier. I was killing the encounters left to right and thought nothing could triumph over me until I ran into the Psychic. The Psychic, who was called just that, the Psychic, was the very first digital NPC to frighten me. They wore these dark orange robes that concealed their face. They didn't have any real gender, as their only distinguishable features were their long hands and sharp nose that poked from beneath the hood. I was asked several questions about myself from the psychic, which I answered truthfully. This was a huge mistake, as upon finishing, they began talking about all of the sins and embarrassing acts that I had committed throughout my life. They weren't referring to my character, they were talking to me, the person who was playing the character. For the first time, I started shaking as they continued to accurately list out my flaws. I fled the room while panicking, and took a small break to collect my thoughts on what just happened. Afterwards, I completed the objective and quickly left that day. I later learned from someone willing to talk about it, that the psychic would only do this if you answered every question truthfully. If you lied to them, they would explain that they couldn't get a good reading on you before the door to the next room opened. I still ask myself something to this day. How the fuck was this NPC able to accomplish any of this? I took a break from the theater for a few weeks before I kept telling myself that the psychic's foresight must have been a coincidence. I showed up once more, but unlike before, there were only a few people left. A total of 6 recurring guests. Nothing else really happened, and I was able to get through the following quests that were still morbid, but they were still nothing compared to the character that I had previously encountered. I made it to Tier 3 after a few more sessions, which started at level 60 and onward. It felt like an accomplishment making it this far with all the epic equipment in my arsenal. I also had plenty of gold left over, and was probably one of the strongest solo players there. However, despite feeling like I was prepared, I wasn't. It would be the last time I ever set foot inside. On that day, I was escorted by the receptionist, ready to do my first Tier 3 quest. She told me that I was one of the few to get this far, and that I was about to face my hardest challenge. She also explained how I would receive a grand prize if I reached the end. My final quest was to locate a dog that was suspected in the death of their owners. The dragons, chimeras, giants, and other horrors awaited me as I kept my cool. There were 2 rooms that stood out to me in this tier. The first noticeable room had Zag, but he wasn't the happy or cheerful kobold from before. He saw my entry into the room and sat on this stump around the other trees. As I got closer, he left his spot and looked me into the eyes. His expression was a serious one. "Listen, this place is dangerous. You need to leave right away." I tried to ask what he meant by this, as if this was some secret quest. "I'm serious. They've gone too far." As Zag was about to finish that sentence, he suddenly disappeared without warning. It was almost as if what happened was some kind of glitch. I continued my advancement until I found the fated room that changed every feeling I had towards the theater. In the final room before that grand prize was a field with a cottage in the back. Next to the cottage and blocking the door was a lone dog. It didn't take long to identify it as a German shepherd, but the thing that was off was that it was panting, but its tongue wasn't sticking out. That was when I remembered the objective: to find a dog. As I stared at this thing, I noticed that littering the floors were several bones. They emitted a stench, and it was the kind of smell that you would try blocking out if you were driving or walking past a dead animal on the road. As I got closer, that stench got worse. Right around the shepherd were decaying bodies, and upon getting a good enough of a distance, I noticed it was slowly feasting on these remains. This startled me enough that it finally noticed my presence. It turned its head slowly and began to depart from where it was sitting. I kept my guard up and raised my magical short sword. It continued its approach, and as it did, its appearance changed. Its front and hind legs began warping as its chest burst open to reveal a set of teeth. Each of its paws burst to reveal a bladed scythe at the end as its body expanded, changing it into an unrecognizable fleshy mass. I am afraid of parasites. They have given me frequent nightmares where they always find a way into my body and infect me. This phobia is what caused me to finally take off my helmet without caring about a suspension, and as I did so, the monster continued its approach. The bones, bodies, and that aberration should have been contained inside the helmet, but that thing was still in the room. What I thought was a 3D rendered creation began to let out a distorted cry. I turned around and sprinted. I kept calling out for help as I turned to see the thing slowly giving chase from behind. I rushed through each of the previous rooms until I found myself at the lobby. It was completely empty. No receptionist and no participants. The double glass doors were locked, and I could still hear the parasite gaining on me as it let out another screeching roar. I was thankful that thing wasn't fast, and also thankful for the chairs. I took one off the floor and used it at the door repeatedly until the glass finally shattered. An alarm sounded as I bolted out of there. For a while, I didn't even go near Zag's Theater until I eventually returned with some friends. We walked by to see that the place had closed down on the following month. Thinking back on it, I believe that place was involved with the missing people reports that frequently popped up around the time of Zag's grand opening. A part of me was happy that it was over. Whatever did happen, Zag's was no more. I could also no longer find anything about it online. Again, whatever happened, the authorities and Google were keeping knowledge of the business under wraps. I only told my non-LARP friends about what happened on my visit, and the fact that they found it hard to believe was a hint that I should keep quiet about it and move on with my life. It also didn't help that the people who went there would tell me that they were no longer allowed to talk about it. A lot of people have come forward about the supernatural at this place, and have even gone into discussions about the oddities in their life. So I want to ask a single question. Has anyone visited Zag's Theater? If so, what was it like?